Welcome back, brave souls, to Nakora Nights. Out on the open prairies of Saskatchewan, small towns sit miles apart. Long roads, endless fields, and silence that feels too heavy. Places where everyone knows your name and notices when you don't belong. Tonight, we're uncovering 10 true Saskatchewan small-town horror stories. Real encounters from towns so quiet, you can hear footsteps long before you see anyone. A neighbor who kept waving, even after his house burned down. A town where the streetlights shut off at exactly the same time every night. And a house at the edge of town where the windows glow, even though no one's lived there for years. These stories weren't shared online. They were whispered, because in towns like these, secrets don't stay buried forever. Before we go any further, tell me, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? Because out here on the prairies, night doesn't fall, it settles in. If you're ready to uncover what small towns hide after dark, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. I know a town like this. Now, lower your volume, don't look toward the window, and remember, in some towns, the silence is listening. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing, True Saskatchewan Small Town Horror Stories. Let's begin. I felt the cold before I heard the sound. A sharp whisper from the old window frame of my rented room above a shuttered bakery on the south side of Saskatoon, the draft slipping in like thin fingers. The place was barely standing, sagging floors, peeling paint, radiators that sputtered more than they warmed, but it was all I could afford after everything fell apart. I had grown up outside Prince Albert, moved to Saskatoon for better opportunities, studied just enough to find work at a community health desk, then lost that job when the clinic downsized and shipped all admin calls to a private firm in Toronto. It was the kind of change that didn't need a reason beyond costs, and the kind of loss that made a person feel small, like numbers mattered more than breath. I worked odd shifts after that, helping clean offices at night, fixing broken blinds for landlords who barely spoke to me, selling old things online just to stretch out rent. Every morning felt the same, heavy, and the silence of not getting hired hurt as much as the hunger from skipping meals. I tried to pretend it wasn't breaking me, but the truth was plain. I felt invisible. It was near the end of September when I found myself hunched over my flickering laptop at 3:12 a.m., desperate and tired, searching for ways to make money fast. I stumbled onto a forum where people traded stories about small side jobs. One person from Nova Scotia swore that private evaluators made easy money, almost fun money, as long as they followed instructions. There was a link. It led to an ad asking for field evaluators across Saskatchewan, flexible hours, no office, small tasks, quit pay. It felt risky, but I needed hope more than I feared scams. I sent a message. 30 minutes later, a reply arrived from someone named Dana Rowan. The tone was formal, corporate, steady. She sent a digital packet with a detailed form to fill out, along with instructions that felt legitimate enough. She asked for my PayPal, my general availability, my region. I filled everything out before doubt could stop me. By morning, she sent my first assignment. I had to visit a neighborhood grocery store called Greenhaven Market on the edge of Stonebridge. It was familiar territory, close enough that I had walked there before just to distract myself from long winter nights. My instructions were simple. Enter between 6:45 p.m. and 9 p.m. Observe a specific employee in aisle 5, ask for help, take mental notes, and submit my evaluation within 12 hours. I remembered hearing about secret shoppers when I worked retail at 16, the way employees whispered about them like ghosts that could end your job with a single report. Now I was becoming one. I biked to the market just after 7:58 p.m., pretending it was another normal day. The store lights glowed through the cloudy evening like trapped moons. Inside, the smell of cleaning solution mixed with warm bakery air. I moved through aisles casually, heart tapping fast, checking my phone to be sure I had the right aisle and name. Aisle 5. The employee was a young man named Caleb. He was lanky, with dark rings under his eyes and skin that looked drained of sleep. His vest was worn, frayed at the edges. He stacked cans without looking up, his movements robotic and tired. I approached slower than planned. I asked him where the canned beans were. He murmured back, saying left side halfway down, not looking at me, not offering to show me, barely gesturing. I said thanks and paused, but he just kept stacking, empty of emotion. I moved on to keep the scene natural, heading to checkout where a cheerful clerk smiled warmly and wished me a good evening. When I stepped outside, the cool Saskatoon night hit me like a wave. I unlocked my bike, sat there to type my report before details faded. As I wrote, I felt movement in the corner of my eye. Across the lot, a figure hurried past, shoulders tense. It was him, Caleb. He walked quickly to a faded blue car, slammed the door, and drove off with a sharp turn that squealed against the pavement. I felt a cold flicker under my ribs, but brushed it off as coincidence. Maybe he had a bad day, maybe he was rushing to catch a bus earlier, maybe anything. The next morning, $50 landed in my PayPal along with my next assignment. The money felt like fuel, like maybe I could pull myself back together. I didn't think about the strange look in Caleb's eyes when he finally glanced at me that night. I should have. 3 days later, I was at my friend Mateo's house on the outskirts of the city. He worked long hours as a mechanic and always let me hide at his place when life felt too heavy. We were eating leftover pizza and watching old comedy reruns. His dog, Kiva, a big husky mix with mismatched eyes, sprawled across the carpet, groggy and content. Around 9:28 p.m., a pounding hit the door. Not knocking. Pounding. Mateo muted the TV. Kiva jerked her head up, growling deep. We waited, thinking maybe we imagined it. Then came 3 more crashes against the door, harder. Mateo stood slowly and moved to the window, lifting one slat of the blinds. His shoulders tensed. I stepped beside him and felt everything inside me drop. Outside on the small porch stood Caleb. Same clothes, same hollow face, but wild now, like he hadn't slept since I saw him. His breathing fogged the cold air. His hair stuck to his forehead, damp like sweat or rain. He paced back and forth, mumbling. Then he slammed his fists into the door again. Mateo swore under his breath and looked at me. "Do you know this guy?" he asked. My mouth dried. I couldn't speak. My silence was the answer. Caleb shouted suddenly, voice cracking in the dark. "I know who you are. You ruined me. I trusted that job. I was already on thin ice. And you walked in like a storm and wiped the floor with me. You think this is funny. You think you are safe." Each word struck the door like a hammer. Kiva barked frantically. Mateo reached for his phone, whispering he was calling the police. I felt sick, dizzy, terrified because somehow this stranger had found me, followed me, figured out my life through nothing but a brief encounter. How? He kept shouting. I heard the report. "You cut the last string I had. You think I don't know your face. You think hiding changes anything." He rammed his shoulder against the door. Wood cracked. I backed away, shaking. Something in his voice wasn't anger. It was despair sharpened into madness. Within minutes, flashing red and blue lights lit the street like broken stars. Caleb ran, sprinting across the yard, but an officer tackled him before he reached the sidewalk. They cuffed him quickly as he thrashed. When they searched him, I saw them pull a long metal object from his pocket, a knife. My knees weakened. In the following days, a detective met with me. She spoke steadily, telling me the pieces she could. His real name was Devin Marlowe. He had worked at Greenhaven Market for nearly 6 years with a long list of write-ups. His performance had been failing for months. He was days away from termination even before I walked in. The night I evaluated him, his landlord had served him a warning. His girlfriend had ended things. His hours were cut. His mind was breaking. My report had been the final push, but something didn't add up. I hadn't given my real name. I hadn't used my personal email, and I had left the store normally. So how did he find me? The detective said the store had cameras. Maybe he reviewed them. Maybe he followed me on his bike that night without me noticing. Maybe he got my license plate number and had someone help him track it. The answers were guesses, nothing certain, which made it worse. The unknown is sharper than truth. After that, I stopped doing field evaluations. I blocked Dana's emails. I found a low-paying but steady job answering phones for an insurance office. I saved. I breathed. Mateo installed cameras around his duplex, one angled at the front steps, one at the driveway. We didn't say it aloud, but both of us were scared, and the fear didn't stop at Devon. It grew roots. Weeks later, I started a second night shift job at a local hospital, not medical work, just clerical tasks and inventory checks. I worked alone in the south wing, long halls, quiet nights. That is where the second horror started. During one shift, I kept seeing a patient walking slowly down the hallway, a man in a thin hospital robe, shuffling like he was exhausted. I called out softly, asking if he needed help. He didn't answer. He just kept walking toward the far end of the corridor, disappearing around the corner. When I checked the patient log later, I froze. His name was on the death list. He had passed that morning. I had signed the paperwork myself. The next time I saw him, I refused to look long, refused to blink, because something about the way he turned his head was wrong, too slow, too empty. His shadow stretched across the wall behind him, even though the overhead lights didn't match the angle. I pretended he wasn't there, but I heard him, steps light as water dripping. I took up jogging near the river to stay sane, but even that betrayed me. Running near the South Saskatchewan River at sunset was supposed to clear my mind. Instead, one evening I heard something splashing behind me, footsteps slapping the water-soaked trail. I turned. Nothing. No person, no animal, no sign anyone had been near. Yet the water showed fresh ripples, circles widening out like something had just climbed from the river and stepped onto the path behind me. Around this time, I rented a small basement suite in the Varsity View area. It was cheap, quiet, a little gloomy, but convenient for my schedule. I thought it was an escape. Instead, it was the opposite. One night, while rearranging furniture, I found a strange vent high in the corner. Then another behind a shelf, too many vents for a suite that size. When I shined a flashlight inside, the beam revealed long, narrow spaces between the walls, not ducts, watching channels. Hidden observation tunnels that stretched behind every room. Someone had built them intentionally to see everything inside. I felt watched even before I knew the truth, like eyes were on me when I slept. Now I understood why. The landlord claimed he didn't know. I didn't believe him, but moving again felt impossible. I couldn't outrun everything forever. The vents made me think of Devon, how easily someone obsessed could track the smallest detail. It made me think of the patient in the hospital hallway, how he seemed to follow even after death. It made me think of the footsteps at the river, the ones that belonged to no one. Paranoia settled in like frost on windows. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. Every shift at the hospital felt watched. Every jog near the river felt hunted. The line between the living and the dead, the sane and the broken, the watcher and the watched, kept thinning. Then came the night everything collided. I returned to my basement suite at 3 a.m. after a long shift. The hallway outside was silent. My door lock clicked strangely, as if someone had tried it earlier. Inside, the air felt wrong, heavy, thicker than usual. I dropped my bag, stepped into the kitchen, and stopped cold. The vent covers were open, all of them. Every vent and every wall open like mouths. A draft moved through the channels behind the walls, carrying faint sounds. Breathing, steady, human-like, but coming from too many directions at once. I backed toward the exit, heart pounding so loud it felt like footsteps. Then something stepped into view from the hallway leading to my bedroom. A silhouette, tall, thin, trembling. For a moment, I thought it was the patient, the ghost from the hospital. Then the figure stepped closer, and I saw the face under the dim light. Devon, or what used to be Devon. His eyes were hollowed, darker than before, his skin pale and stretched too tightly. His voice rasped like something broken. "You keep watching me." My breath froze. I told him I wasn't, but the more I spoke, the closer he came, as if my fear pulled him forward. "You follow me," he whispered. "You walk where I walk. You sign what I become. You stand where I lose everything." His words made no sense, not fully, but the madness in them felt real enough to kill me. I lunged for the door. He charged. His hands grabbed my arm with a strength that didn't fit his thin frame. I fought back, slammed my shoulder into him. He fell, hitting the floor with a crack. I ran outside, barefoot, sprinting into the cold street. I didn't stop until I reached the police station. When officers searched the basement suite, they found the vents, but not him. No trace, no footprints, no broken lock, no sign he had ever been there. For days, I questioned my mind. But then, the hospital reported something strange. The hallway cameras in the south wing caught footage of someone walking the corridor at 2:19 a.m. Thin, slow, moving with the same dragging steps I had seen from the dead patient. But when they zoomed in, the face was blurred, smudged in a way no camera malfunction had ever caused before. When I saw it, my entire body went numb. Because the face, even blurred, had the shape of someone I recognized. And now, whenever I walk into a store, whenever someone stacks cans on a shelf or pauses in the corner of my vision, I feel a cold certainty. They know me, they watch me, and I cannot tell which ones are living, which ones are dead, and which ones are still deciding. Sometimes the smallest action can shatter someone standing on the edge, reminding us to treat every person with care because we never know their battles. Silence, fear, and hidden struggles can grow dangerous when ignored, teaching us to trust our instincts and protect our boundaries. Watching our surroundings and listening to our inner warnings can save us long before danger arrives. In the end, the story shows that awareness, empathy, and caution are not weaknesses, they are survival. I never imagined that one random job in a quiet Saskatchewan city would change everything about how I see people, places, and the way danger sometimes hides in normal faces. I want to start this the way my mind remembers it, sharp and cold, like a sentence whispered inside my ear while standing in the dark. I kept telling myself I was safe, that Regina was too calm, too ordinary, too slow to hold anything truly terrifying, but I learned that small towns carry secrets deep in their bones, secrets that wait for the right person to wander close. I am that person, and this is what happened to me in a way I still cannot fully understand. Back then, I worked at a call center near Leuven Drive. I had taken the job after my old position at a hardware store ended when the building shut down from water damage. I was behind on rent, living alone in a small basement suite that always smelled like damp carpet, and I couldn't afford to be picky. The calls were dull most days, mostly people asking about account resets or complaining about wrong orders, nothing strange. I kept to myself, walked home after late shifts, and tried not to think about how empty my life felt. My parents lived far north, and we hadn't talked much since their divorce. My only friend in the city, Mira, worked night shifts at a bakery and slept during the day, so we rarely saw each other. I was used to being alone, and maybe that made everything easier for something else to reach toward me. It happened on a cold Saturday near the end of October, the kind of night where the wind feels like thin fingers pressing along the back of your neck. I had finished my shift around 7:45 p.m., but I stayed a little longer to help a coworker restart her station. When I finally logged out, the building was almost empty and the lights felt too bright over the rows of desks. I grabbed my coat, checked my phone, and saw I had no messages. I told myself it didn't bother me. I stepped outside, and the sky was already dark with a few streetlights flickering. I usually took the bus, but because it was late, I ordered a ride and waited across the street. While I waited, my phone buzzed, and at first I thought it was the driver. But the call wasn't labeled, and something in my chest tightened. I answered anyway, trying to sound calm. A voice whispered into my ear. Not quiet, not loud, but too steady for someone calling by mistake. The voice was male, slow, and heavy, and his words felt like cold air sliding under a door. He described something I still cannot erase, a scene so specific it felt like I could see it. He said there was a body in a small house on the north side of Regina, near the old industrial strip, lying by a broken table with blood smeared toward a back door. He described the position of the arms, the crushed side of the head, the metal smell in the air, and the footprints leading deeper inside. Every detail felt wrong, like he wanted me to picture it too clearly. My breathing turned shallow. I kept trying to ask who he was, why he was telling me this, but he kept describing the scene until he said one last thing, something that made my fingers go numb. He said the footprint stopped too suddenly, leaving a trail that ended like the person had vanished. The call ended without any sound, only a click. My ride showed up, and I got in shaking. The driver asked if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. When I got home, I locked the door, sat on the floor, and told myself it was a prank, maybe some bored person trying to scare random call center numbers. But my mind wouldn't stop replaying his last sentence. The footprints ended. People do not end like that. I tried to sleep but woke up every hour. At 3:15 a.m., I heard someone walking upstairs, even though I lived alone in the basement suite. I held my breath until the sound stopped, but I didn't go upstairs to check. I kept telling myself, old houses make noises. The next morning, I saw something on the local news while scrolling half awake. Police were investigating a house on the north side, near the industrial strip. A body had been found by a broken table, blood smears near the back door. I felt my stomach twist so hard I thought I might faint. It was exactly what the caller described. I slammed my laptop shut and pressed both hands over my face. For hours, I sat frozen. I didn't understand why he called me or how he knew what would happen. The only thing I knew for certain was that the city felt different now, like something was walking along the edges of my life and watching quietly. I tried to return to my normal routine, but everything felt wrong. The next week at work, during a late shift, another strange thing happened. It wasn't a call this time. It was something I saw on the security screens behind the supervisor's desk. I wasn't supposed to look at them, but the supervisor left to get coffee, and a small movement caught my eye. One of the screens showed the lobby entrance. Several people walked into the building, one after another, like they were following someone, but no one exited. The doors never opened after they entered, and no one else appeared on any other camera. I stared at the footage, confused, until the supervisor returned and turned the monitor off, saying the feed glitched sometimes. But I knew what I saw. 5 people had walked inside. None had walked out. That night, I texted Mira telling her I needed a break, maybe a walk or something. She agreed to meet me downtown near Victoria Park. I tried to explain what had been happening, but I could tell she thought stress was making me imagine things. I didn't blame her. I wish she was right. But the world around me kept shifting, little by little. The next strange thing happened on a bus ride after a late shift. It was around 9:58 p.m. I sat near the back while the bus rolled through quiet streets. A man got on near Broad Street and sat across from me. He didn't look up, didn't move much, just stared at his hands. A few minutes later, he stood and rang the bell. The bus driver slowed and stopped at a bus stop sign. But there was something odd. The sign was too new, too clean, and I didn't remember there being a stop on that stretch. The man stepped off, and as soon as the doors closed, the driver muttered something. He said that stop had been removed years ago. I looked out the window, and the man was gone from sight too quickly, almost like he stepped into a place he wasn't supposed to enter. I tried to ask the driver what he meant, but he only shook his head and kept driving. By the time I reached my stop, my hands were sweating. The next job that pulled me into something darker started from a simple listing online. Not babysitting, not cleaning, something else. It was labeled house sitting and short monitoring shifts. A family needed someone to watch their home for a few hours on weekends, very simple tasks, and the pay was too good. I told myself I needed money, and maybe this could pull my mind away from everything else. Their message said their house was in a quieter part of Regina, near the outskirts. The name signed at the bottom was Mara. I had never heard that name before, but it felt soft and harmless. We exchanged a few messages, and the instructions seemed clear. She said her husband would greet me and show me around. She said their children would not be home. She said the house was strict about small things like lights and locked doors. She said nothing strange in her messages, nothing that made me question her. I told Mira about it. She told me to be careful, the same way she always did. She told me to text her when I arrived. She told me to leave if anything felt wrong. On the day of the job, the sky was low and heavy, the kind of sky that makes the world feel smaller. I reached the house around 6:29 p.m. It stood on a quiet street with large yards, old trees, and no sound except wind pushing dry leaves across the road. The house was pale yellow but chipped, with a porch light already on. I felt something tighten in my chest, the same heavy feeling I got before storms. I knocked twice, and no one answered. I tried once more, and this time I heard steps inside. When the door opened, a man stood there, tall, thin, older than I expected. His eyes looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. His shirt had faint stains, and he blinked at me as if trying to remember who I was. He said I must be the house sitter and told me to come in. Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I stepped inside. The air hit me instantly. It smelled like dust, like something old trapped under the floorboards. The living room was cluttered with boxes, blankets, and stacks of papers. No family photos, no signs of children, no warm touches that made a house feel alive. He kept scratching his jaw while talking, like he didn't know how to explain anything. He said Mara left earlier, that she should return soon, that I could wait in the back room. I told myself not to panic, not yet. I kept thinking about money, about rent, about surviving. I walked down the narrow hallway. The carpet felt thin and uneven. A cold draft brushed against my ankles. I sat on the couch and pulled out my phone. Mira had texted asking if I arrived safely. I tried to type something normal, but my fingers hesitated. I wrote that the place felt strange. The man kept pacing past the hallway, mumbling, glancing toward the side door near the kitchen. Every time he passed, his eyes flicked toward me, like he wasn't sure if I should be there. At 7:14 p.m., I decided to leave. My chest felt too tight. I stood and started walking toward the front door, saying I had somewhere else to be. His expression shifted too quickly, turning sharp and desperate. He said she was probably downstairs, that she often worked on craft projects in the basement, that maybe she was waiting. He pointed toward a door I hadn't noticed earlier, half hidden behind a thin curtain. A cold weight settled deep inside me. I opened the door because I thought if I didn't, he might block my way out. The smell rose instantly, earthy and metallic. The basement was dark, so dark it felt like light couldn't reach it. I couldn't see any steps, only a hollow black that waited for something to fall inside it. I didn't move. My heart pounded so loud I thought he could hear it. He said I should go down, that she wanted to meet me, that the boys were probably playing with paint or glue, but his voice sounded wrong now, too soft, too steady, nothing like before. I stepped back slowly. I said I just got a message and needed to leave. My voice shook. I walked toward the front door and grabbed the handle. It was locked. He stood behind me, too still. My breath caught as I twisted the lock. The click felt like the loudest sound in the world. I yanked the door open and ran. I didn't turn back until I reached my car. When I finally looked, he stood in the front yard with both hands curled into fists. His face held no emotion. I drove until my hands stopped shaking. I parked near a shopping plaza and cried, not because of fear alone, but because I knew something was connected, that none of this was random. 2 weeks passed. I tried not to think about the basement, the man, or the smell that felt alive. But fear stays inside the body like a seed. It waits for the next moment to grow. One night, my phone buzzed. A new number. A message. It said they found my sitter profile online, that they had 2 children, that they needed someone for an evening job, same payment, same tone. The name signed was Mara. I never made a profile. I blocked the number, but the next day another message came. From another number, using the same words, same lines, same soft trick. Then more numbers followed, one every 2 or 3 days, each asking for a sitter, always mentioning 2 children, always in Regina's outer neighborhoods. I changed my number. I stayed with Mira for a while. I watched windows, doors, shadows, footsteps, anything that moved near me. And even now, as I write this, I think about the call center footage of people entering and never leaving, the man stepping off the bus at a stop removed years ago, the murder scene described before it happened, the basement doorway waiting for someone to step into the dark. Sometimes when I scroll through local job postings, I see listings that look normal, almost too normal, asking for help, offering good money, written in calm voices. And I wonder how many people trust those voices. How many walk toward a door they should never open? How many vanish like footprints that stop too suddenly? Regina is small, but fear grows large here, hiding in quiet streets and old houses and phone numbers that change too quickly, asking for someone new to answer. This story reminds us that danger often hides behind normal faces, quiet places, and offers that feel too perfect. So we must trust our instincts when something feels wrong, because our fear is sometimes our only warning. It teaches us that protecting ourselves is more important than being polite, and leaving early can save a life when a situation turns strange. It shows that staying alert, sharing details with trusted friends, and speaking up can keep us safe from hidden threats. In the end, the lesson is simple. We survive by listening to the voice inside us that whispers when something is not right. I grew up on the north edge of Prince Albert, a place where winters scrape the bones of the town and the forests press close enough that you can feel them breathing at night. My whole childhood was shaped by the quiet of this place, the long empty roads, the frozen rivers, and the stories locals whispered when the power flickered during blizzards. I left for a few years, tried living in a bigger city, but something about the silence of home always pulled me back. I worked simple jobs, mostly maintenance for small businesses, nothing special, but it let me live the kind of quiet life I thought I wanted. Looking back, I did not realize how much that quiet could hide until everything changed. I never believed that danger could grow in a place as small as this, where you can hear snow crunch under a person's boots from half a block away. I always thought I was safe here, surrounded by the same streets and the same people I had seen for decades. I was wrong. I had decided to sell my old crossover, a silver SUV I had bought secondhand when I was younger. It had carried me through frozen prairies and long gravel routes, but after years of traveling the same roads, I upgraded to a newer vehicle. I did not want the old one rotting in the lot behind my apartment building, so I cleaned it up, vacuumed the crumbs from the seats, wiped the dashboard, and took as many pictures as I could. Inside, outside, even under the hood. The paint had dulled on the front, and the air conditioning rattled whenever it came on, but the engine was strong, and I had always kept up with maintenance. I listed it online, a simple post on a classified site I had used before. Nothing dramatic, nothing inviting trouble, just a normal, honest listing. I priced it fairly so people wouldn't think I was hiding something. The ad went live on a Thursday afternoon, and the rest of the day passed in silence with no calls. But early the next morning, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. The sender said his name was William and asked if the car was still available. I told him yes. He responded fast, almost too fast, saying he could come look at it the next night after work, around 9 or maybe 9:30. The time made me pause, but people here work odd hours, and evenings are easier for some. My apartment building sat on the western side of Prince Albert, quiet and tucked close to the highway. The parking lot was open, bright lights scattered through tall poles, nothing hidden. Meeting someone there always felt harmless. I told him that 9:30 at night was fine and that I would meet him by the vehicle. He said he would drive a dark sedan and would text when he arrived. It seemed normal enough. I had no reason to expect anything dangerous, especially not in the town I had lived in my whole life. The next evening, I deep cleaned the SUV again, wanting it to look its best. I cleared the storage compartments, tossed out old receipts, even wiped down the windows twice. Around 9:15, I put on a heavy hoodie and went downstairs. The air held its familiar cold bite, the kind that seeps through fabric no matter how thick it is. A few residents walked their dogs or hauled groceries from their cars. Nothing unusual. I stood next to my SUV and scrolled through my phone, glancing up every time headlights cut across the snowy lot. At 9:30 exactly, a black sedan rolled in slowly, almost gliding between the parked vehicles. The windows were tinted darker than anything I had seen around here. The car stopped 2 spaces away from me and the door opened. A tall man stepped out, heavy-built, with broad shoulders and a shaved head. His jacket was thick, dark, and worn-looking. Tattoos crawled up his hands and disappeared under his sleeves. His eyes had a strange intensity, the kind that made you feel like he was studying every breath you took. Still, He smiled with a polite expression that felt almost too careful, like someone acting out friendliness rather than feeling it. He approached me with a slow, steady walk and asked if the SUV was mine. I nodded and said he must be William. He confirmed. Right away, he examined the vehicle, running his hand along the side as he circled it. He didn't ask many questions, only a few basic things that anyone pretending to buy a car would ask. Can he look under the hood? Can he check the tires? Does it burn oil? He took out a small flashlight and shined it beneath the chassis, then moved to the back without saying much. I tried to keep the conversation light, but he barely responded. When he finally asked if he could take it for a quick drive, I said I would ride with him, as I always did when selling something like this. He nodded like he expected that. Inside the SUV, the air felt uncomfortably still. He drove quietly, his breathing slow and heavy, staring straight ahead with a stiff jaw. He tested the brakes, sped up on a main road, and didn't speak a word for the whole 10 minutes. When we returned to the lot, he parked exactly where I had been standing. I stepped out, relieved that the ride was over, and asked what he thought of it. He stared at me for a long moment before saying he would think about it. His voice was flat, empty. Not disappointed, not impressed, just emotionless. Then he asked, very casually, if he could use my bathroom before he left. His tone suggested it was nothing, but deep inside, something recoiled. Hard, everything in me tightened, a cold ripple moving through my arms. I told him politely that I did not let strangers into my apartment. My voice was calm, but I could feel the tension under every word. He didn't respond at first, just stared, breathing slowly, eyes unblinking. Then he nodded once and said it was fine. I gave a brief wave and walked away, trying to appear calm. Instead of going into the side entrance like I usually did, I circled to the front, listening for footsteps behind me. When I reached the lobby, I exhaled with relief. I pressed the elevator button and rode up to my floor. The doors opened, and I stepped into the hallway. It was quiet, that kind of muffled quiet small buildings get late at night. Then I froze. At the other end of the hallway, the stairwell door swung open. William walked out, the same jacket, the same slow stride, his eyes fixed directly on me. For a second, I tried to convince myself that it wasn't him, that there was no way he could have gotten to the stairwell that fast, but the closer he came, the more my chest tightened. It was him. I turned away and walked quickly in the opposite direction. His footsteps followed, heavier, faster. I broke into a run. The hallway blurred as I sprinted to the other stairwell. My pulse hammered so hard I could barely hear anything else. When I crashed through the stairwell door, my breath burst out in a cloud. I flew down 2 flights, nearly tripping on the last step, and burst into the underground garage. The sound of his steps followed, echoing through the concrete. I could not tell how close he was, but the echoes made it feel like he was right behind me. I didn't stop. I tore across the garage to the next stairwell, shoved through the door, and ran up the steps. My legs shook. When I reached the ground floor, I threw myself out the exit and into the open air. I sprinted across the icy lot to my SUV. My hands trembled so badly that I struggled to press the unlock button. Once inside, I slammed the locks, jammed the key into the ignition, and sped away from the building. I called emergency services, voice shaking, trying to explain everything. The dispatcher kept me talking as I circled around the streets near my building, too afraid to go home. After several minutes, police vehicles arrived. I parked down the street and watched their lights flash through the trees and snowflakes. William's sedan was still in the lot. Police found him trying to force open someone's ground-level patio door. He had no tools, no wallet, no intention of buying anything. What sent a deeper chill through me was realizing he had parked in a spot that gave a perfect view of every person entering or leaving the building. The officers questioned him, but he would not say why he followed me upstairs or why he came back inside the building at all. His face was blank, calm, as if nothing about his behavior was strange. I remember his eyes as the officers led him away. There was no anger, no fear, no regret, just a cold emptiness that stayed with me for weeks. After that night, I deleted the car listing and refused to meet strangers at my building ever again. I told myself I was safe now, that the worst part was over. But the weeks that followed proved otherwise. Prince Albert has stretches of forest so dense that sound seems to vanish into the branches. A few days after the incident, I went for a walk by the river to clear my mind. The water moved slowly under sheets of broken ice, and the trees creaked in the cold wind. I stopped near the bank where a fisherman stood alone, casting his line into the dark water. He seemed calm at first, humming softly, waiting for a bite. Then he stiffened. His head turned sharply toward the woods, the part where no path existed. His face went pale. I heard him whisper something under his breath. I asked if he was all right. He didn't answer. He only stared deeper into the trees. Then he dropped his rod. His breath shuddered. He said he heard someone calling his name from inside the forest, someone using the exact tone a friend would use to get his attention. But he had come alone. No one knew he was here. And the voice had come from a place where no one could walk without breaking branches and crunching snow. I tried to help him gather his gear, but he shook so hard that he nearly dropped everything again. He left in a rush, refusing to look back toward the trees. That night, I could not sleep. A week later, I checked into a small roadside motel south of town after a long day of work. I wanted silence and a warm shower. When I entered my room, I noticed muddy footprints on the carpet leading from the doorway toward the bathroom. They were large, deep, the kind someone with heavy boots would leave. At first, I thought the room had not been cleaned properly, but something bothered me. There were no footprints leading out, only in. I stood very still, listening to the quiet room, the humming heater, the faint ticking of the pipes. I checked the closet, the bathroom, behind the curtains. Nothing. I told the front desk, and they insisted no one else had access to the room. Their confusion frightened me more than if they had just admitted a mistake. The final incident came at the hospital where I had taken temporary work, helping with equipment cleaning. One night we admitted a man who looked half frozen, wearing thin clothes not meant for the cold. He mumbled something I couldn't understand and kept glancing at the windows as if something outside was stalking him. A nurse tried to calm him while we placed him on a bed. His hands were shaking violently, and he kept asking if shadows could follow people from one place to another. When morning came, he was gone. The bed was empty, the blankets pushed aside, and the ID band we had clipped on him rested neatly on the pillow. No one saw him leave. No cameras captured him. Security insisted it was impossible for someone to slip out unnoticed, especially in his condition. I could not shake the feeling that all these events were pieces of something larger, something moving quietly through the town. The voice in the forest, the footprints with no exit, the man who vanished before dawn, the stranger who followed me through the building. It felt like something was bleeding through the edges of reality here, something that watched people long before they noticed it. I started driving past the police station whenever I had to meet someone from online. I changed my routes home. I triple-checked locks. Every time I passed the stairwell where William appeared that night, my chest tightened. Sometimes, when I walked past the river, the wind carried sounds that almost resembled a voice, too faint to understand. I still think about the man they caught trying to pry open that patio door. I think about how quiet he was, how calm. And I wonder what would have happened if I had let him into my apartment, even for a moment. I wonder if the river fisherman was right when he said the forest itself was calling his name. Sometimes late at night, when the hallway of my building goes still and the sound of the wind pushes against the windows, I imagine footsteps on the other side of my door. Slow, heavy, patient. And I remember that he had asked to use my bathroom, like he wanted to see inside, like he wanted to know where everything was. I try to tell myself that the danger is gone, that whatever happened that night ended when the police took him away. But some nights, when the power flickers and the shadows stretch too far across the floor, I swear I hear a soft breath near the stairwell, as if someone is waiting for me to walk by again. Every story people whisper about this town carries a warning. Mine is simple. Never assume small places are harmless. Sometimes the quiet is just something holding its breath, waiting for you to step where it wants you. Sometimes danger hides behind a friendly face, so always trust your instincts. Never let strangers into your home, no matter how normal the situation seems. Always meet people in safe, public places where help is close. Your safety comes first, because one small decision can save your life. I always believed small towns stayed quiet after dark, the kind of quiet that helps you breathe. But I learned the hard way that Moose Jaw has shadows you don't see until they're too close. My name is Nathan, and nothing about what happened to me ever made sense. Not then, not now, not even when I try to forget it before bed. I worked as the night clerk at a tiny roadside lodge on the south edge of Moose Jaw, a fading building with cracked paint and a neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. People stayed there when they ran out of options or when they were too tired to keep driving along the lonely highway. The night shift was mine because nobody else wanted it. The pay wasn't good, the coffee tasted like wet ash, and the lobby lights flickered so often that I thought they were winking at me. Still, the job kept a roof over my head, and it gave me long hours of quiet when the world slept. After 11 at night, the hotel slowed down into silence. Truckers checked in, a couple argued outside their room, and sometimes a lost tourist asked for directions. But most nights, it was just me and the faint hum of the vending machine. When I got bored, which was almost always, I scrolled through online listings for free furniture or cheap electronics. People gave away all kinds of strange things, and I liked seeing what odd treasures turned up. Back then, my old TV had died, just went black in the middle of a movie and refused to come back. Watching shows on my phone made my eyes burn, and I wanted something bigger but cheap. One night, around 1:17 a.m., while I was finishing cold chicken strips from the gas station and fighting sleep, I saw a listing for a used flat screen. It wasn't suspiciously cheap, just low enough to seem like someone wanted to get rid of it fast. The pictures looked real too, showing a dimly lit living room with a sagging couch and cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. That detail made me relax. People who stage scams don't usually include messy backgrounds. I sent a quick message saying I could buy it the next day. Then I went back to watching the empty hall through the security screen, listening to the wind scrape against the door. An hour later, my phone buzzed. The message said, "This is Leanne." Yes, still available. You can pick it up tomorrow evening if you want. The name wasn't in the ad, but that wasn't strange. I said 7:45 p.m. Worked for me and asked for the address. She answered with a location on a quiet street near the east side of Moose Jaw, an older neighborhood with large yards, cracked sidewalks, and small homes that looked tired but safe. The next day, after my shift, I pulled out some cash and drove to the address. The sun hovered low, painting the town with soft yellow light. Kids coasted down sidewalks on their bikes, and someone nearby grilled something that smelled like onions and smoke. The house Leanne gave me was pale blue with peeling trim and a porch that slumped forward like it was tired. The grass needed cutting, but it didn't look abandoned. As I walked toward the porch, the front door swung open. A woman stepped out, short with straight blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore a hoodie and worn-out jeans and gave me a tired smile. She looked young, maybe late 20s. "You must be Nathan," she said with a soft voice. "That's me," I answered, trying to sound casual. "Here to see the TV. I'm Leanne. Come in. Sorry about the mess. We're in the middle of moving." Her smile didn't reach her eyes, but she didn't seem dangerous. I followed her into the house. Inside, it smelled faintly like dust and old wood. A weak lamp glowed from the corner, lighting boxes lined along the wall like stiff soldiers. The room felt empty in a strange way, like it was holding its breath. "No problem," I said. "Moving is always chaotic." She laughed, but it came out thin, almost rehearsed. "The TV is just down the hall. Last room on the right." Something tugged at me, a tiny warning that whispered in my mind. Maybe it was the unnatural quiet, the kind that presses against your ears until your heartbeat sounds too loud. Or maybe it was how her footsteps didn't match the rhythm of mine, like she hesitated behind me more than she should have. But I kept walking through the narrow hallway, noticing faint marks on the carpet, as though someone had been dragging boxes or furniture. She stopped at the final door, opened it slightly, and said, "It's in here." I stepped inside, expecting to see the TV leaning against a wall. Instead, the room was almost empty. No furniture, no boxes, Just bare walls, dusty blinds, and silence heavy enough to crush air from my lungs. Before I could speak, the door behind me slammed shut. The lock clicked. I spun around and grabbed the knob. It rattled but held firm. "Leanne," I shouted, "what's going on?" No answer. My pulse thudded in my throat. The quiet in the house felt different now, like something was pressing its face against the door and listening. I pulled out my phone and saw it. No service. Not a single bar. My skin prickled. I put my ear against the door, and that's when I heard them. Voices. Two of them. Leanne's voice low and shaking, and a deeper voice I hadn't heard before. A man. I heard my name. Then I heard something that made every hair on my arms rise. "He's already inside." My stomach twisted. I banged hard on the door. "Let me out," I yelled. "Open the door now." Silence. I rushed to the window, pulled at the latch, but it was old and jammed. The glass wouldn't budge. I stepped back, chest tight, mind racing for any way out. The room gave me nothing. Then something strange happened, small but important. I pressed my ear back to the door and heard footsteps in the hallway, but they didn't match the ones I heard earlier. They were slow, dragging, and then they stopped right at the door. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear movement. Whoever stood there stood too still. That stillness hurt more than any threat. I had one idea. It was stupid, risky, desperate. But I didn't have a second idea, so I pulled open my phone and turned the volume to the highest setting. I opened the alarm app and tapped the loudest possible siren. Then I tossed the phone to the far corner of the room and pressed myself against the wall beside the door. The siren shrieked like a fire tearing through metal. Footsteps hurried toward the room, heavy and angry. The lock clicked open and the door swung wide. A man stepped inside. Tall, broad shoulders, hood up, hands clenched at his sides. His eyes snapped toward the ringing phone in the corner. That was my moment. I lunged with every bit of strength I had, slamming my shoulder against his and knocking him off balance. His elbow scraped my chest as I slipped past him into the hallway. Leanne appeared from the living room, shock widening her eyes. She reached for me, fingers outstretched like claws, but I ducked and ran. My legs shook as I sprinted through the doorway, jumping off the porch steps and racing toward my car. Behind me, I heard the man shout. I didn't turn. I fumbled my keys, hit unlock, threw myself inside, locked the doors, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine hiccuped before roaring alive. They stood on the porch. Leanne frozen, the man breathing heavy. Their eyes followed me as I sped away. My hands trembled so much I could barely steer. I didn't stop until I saw the bright lights of a gas station. I ran inside, breath shaking, and asked the cashier to call the police. Officers arrived, listened to my story, took notes, and told me to guide them to the house. I agreed, though every part of me wanted to say no and never return. We arrived at the place 10 minutes later, but something was wrong. The porch light was off. The windows were covered. The house sat like a dark, dead thing. The officers knocked, called out, walked around the property. No voices, no people, no signs of anyone. A neighbor stepped outside and told the officers that the house was supposed to be empty. The owner was on a work trip and wouldn't return until the end of the month. No one was supposed to be inside. But someone was. Someone locked me in that room. Someone knew my name. Someone stood silently at the door like they were waiting for something worse than fear. The listing disappeared. The phone number disconnected. I never saw my phone again. The officers said people sometimes break into vacant homes and set traps to steal money or worse. They said I was lucky, but lucky didn't feel like the right word. That would have been the end of the story if things stopped there, but they didn't. A week later, back at work during another sleepy night shift, something strange happened. I was alone at the desk, scrolling half-heartedly, when the hotel landline rang. The sound cut through the silence so sharply that I jumped. It was 3:15 a.m. I answered. "Moose Jaw Lodge front desk, how can I help you?" No one spoke. I listened closely. The only sound was faint breathing, soft and uneven. "Hello?" I said again. The breathing stopped, and I heard a whisper, low, almost broken. "You were inside the wrong room." The line went dead. I froze. My heart hammered like it was trying to break out of my chest. I checked the caller ID. It said the call came from inside the hotel. The basement storage room. I knew that room was locked. Only I had the key. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me, but I forced myself to go check. Every step down the creaking staircase felt heavier than the last. When I reached the storage room, the door was locked, untouched. But I heard something inside, furniture sliding, slow and scraping. Something moved in the darkness behind the door. Even though the room was too cramped for anyone to walk around freely, I backed away, whispering no under my breath. It didn't stop. The scraping got louder, angrier. I ran back upstairs and locked myself in the office until sunrise. I didn't tell my boss what I heard, afraid he'd think I was losing my mind. A few days later, the hotel signed up for a special tunnel tour under Moose Jaw and offered free passes for employees. I didn't want to go, but my coworkers insisted it would help me relax. So I joined the late afternoon tour with a group of about 15 people. Our guide was a cheerful man who spoke loudly to cover the eerie echoes of the underground tunnels. Halfway through, while we walked through a long, narrow passage, the guide suddenly stopped. "Did someone fall behind?" he asked. He counted each head twice, frowning. We all looked around. No one was missing. But footsteps echoed behind us, steady and slow. The guide called out, "Anyone there?" But no one answered. When he took a step toward the sound, the footsteps stopped instantly. He laughed nervously and said some silly joke to calm everyone, but he looked pale for the rest of the tour. I recognized that sound. That dragging, quiet step, the same steps I heard outside the locked room in the house. That night, I quit my job. Some things follow you, even when you try to leave them behind. Some shadows don't vanish when the sun rises. I don't use online listings anymore. I don't tour basements. I don't even walk near that neighborhood on the east side. Sometimes, when I wake up around the same time every night, I hear slow footsteps echoing faintly beneath my apartment floor. My building doesn't have a basement. You understand that safety matters more than any cheap deal, and meeting strangers alone can turn into something you never expect. You realize that silence, hesitation, or strange behavior are warnings you should never ignore. And you see that your life can change with one decision, so always choose caution, because not everyone you meet has good intentions. I did not plan to look for a car at all when everything began, and even now, when I think back to those days, I wonder if something older and darker had already set its eyes on me long before I stepped anywhere near Yorkton. I work as a night security guard in a cold storage warehouse, a job that leaves long hours of silence, humming machines, and time to think. My son, whom I will call Milo here, had just turned restless with the idea of growing up, always asking me when he could take his test, when he could start driving himself to school and to his shift at the gas station. I kept telling him later, then later again, hoping he would forget, but kids never forget something that makes them feel older. He would sit next to me with his tablet and scroll through car ads, showing me each one with hope in his eyes. I tried to smile each time, though I knew my budget was thin. He begged me almost every day. He showed test scores, safe ratings, prices that still made my stomach twist, and videos about good used cars. After weeks and weeks, I gave in. His birthday was coming soon, and I thought it might be a good surprise, something he would never expect from me. I started searching all the usual places, the big sites, the crowded listings, the normal stuff everyone uses. Everything worth anything was too expensive or vanished the same day it was posted. I felt defeated. I saved the one site I hated most for last, Craigslist. Everyone I knew had a bad story about it. Scams, weird people, traps. I avoided it for years, but I was desperate, so I tried anyway. I typed in used cars near Yorkton and hit search. Most of it looked normal, nothing interesting, until one ad grabbed me. It felt like it pulled my eyes toward it. A silver Honda, clean inside, low mileage, no reported accidents, and priced so low it made my heart jump. The pictures looked real, taken in an unpaved driveway with big trees around it, not touched up or fake-looking. A man calling himself Wade said it belonged to his kid who had left the province, so he wanted it gone fast. He lived just outside Yorkton, in a tiny place called Willow Bend on the edge of farm roads. I called him that evening after work. His voice sounded older, calm, steady. He told me the car ran smooth, he had changed the brakes and battery, no problems at all. We agreed to meet the next afternoon. I told Milo I had errands, tucked the cash deep inside my jacket and drove off. The sky was gray and heavy, sagging over the fields as I left the city behind. The roads narrowed, lined with trees that grew taller and tighter. The whole area felt quiet in a strange way, like the birds and wind had decided to leave. His address took me up a long gravel drive with bushes that brushed my truck as I passed. At the top stood a small house with peeling paint and a front porch that looked tired from years of winters. I stepped out, letting the cold air sting my skin. There was no silver Honda anywhere, just an old blue truck parked under a leaning carport with rust along the edges. But the house number was correct. I walked toward the front porch. The gravel crunched loud under my boots because the whole place was too silent. The door had a metal knocker shaped like a wolf head. No bell. I knocked once. Then again, no answer. I waited, feeling the gray sky pressing down. I knocked harder. Still nothing. I called his number, and somewhere inside the house a ringtone played, thin and distant. My skin prickled. Something felt off. I glanced through the window beside the porch. The curtains were halfway open. Inside it was dim. I saw a living room with stacks of old newspapers, furniture covered in sheets, and something sitting in an armchair. For a moment I thought it was a stuffed animal, but the shape was too human, slumped slightly, head tilted down. The face looked pale. Too pale. Too still. My heart kicked harder. I stepped back. Maybe it was a mannequin, maybe a doll, maybe someone resting, but something deep in my chest whispered that none of those things were true. I walked around the side of the house. The garage door was half open. Inside were shelves full of car parts, rows and rows. Doors, mirrors, headlights, seats, all neatly labeled with dates and names. It did not look like a messy workshop. It looked like a catalog someone cared about too much. No sign of the car I came for. I turned to leave, and that was when I saw another figure through the back window. It stood perfectly still, facing away, looking toward the field behind the house. It did not sway or shift like a normal person. It was placed there. My breath came out tight. I walked closer, almost against my will, and knocked lightly on the glass. No movement. The back door moved slightly with the wind, creaking open to reveal a dark hallway. The ringtone started again, coming from deeper in the house. Then it stopped. I froze. The blinds at the window suddenly snapped shut right in front of me. Something had been watching. Something that did not want to be seen. I ran. I sprinted across the yard, down the drive, jumped into my truck, and slammed the locks. I floored it so hard, gravel sprayed behind me like a storm. I did not slow down until I reached the highway, breathing hard, hands trembling on the wheel. When I finally made it home, I stayed in my driveway, staring at my phone. The ad was gone, like it never existed. I tried the number again, disconnected. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face in the chair, the figure at the back window, the blinds snapping shut. In my mind, the stillness felt too perfect, like something arranged on purpose. Early the next morning, I went to the local RCMP office. I told the officer what happened, leaving out the strange fear pulling at me, but giving the facts. He typed slowly, nodded once, and said they had heard about things like this before. Fake listings, strange setups, sometimes worse. He did not explain what worse meant. I tried to forget everything, but the images played again and again in my head, especially during my night shifts at the warehouse. The cold storage freezer alarm kept going off even when the freezer was empty. Every time I checked it, the alarm stopped and I heard faint scratching from inside the metal walls. I blamed old machinery, even when the noise sounded almost like writing or tapping. I told myself I was tired. One night, near closing time, a delivery driver knocked on the side door of the warehouse. He had boxes for us. I opened the door. He looked pale, like he had been scared by something on the way. He handed me the boxes and said thanks, calling me by my first name even though I had never met him. Before I could ask how he knew my name, he glanced over my shoulder at the empty hallway behind me and whispered that someone inside the condemned building across from the warehouse had thanked him earlier, also by name. He said he heard footsteps inside, even though the place had been shut down for years. That made my stomach twist because it reminded me too much of what I had seen in Willow Bend. A few days later, one of the teachers at Milo's school called me during my shift. She sounded very shaken. She said assignments were being turned in with the name of a student who had moved away years ago. I asked how that was possible. She said she found the papers on her desk in the morning even though the school was locked overnight. She said the handwriting on the pages was shaky, uneven, like someone copying the letters too slowly. She said the drawings in the margins looked like unfinished faces staring at her. I felt a cold line run down my spine. Something was circling around the edges of my life, as if Willow Bend had opened a door I never should have touched. A week after my police report, a detective left me a voicemail. They had gone to the property. No one lived there. No one had lived there in over a year. The neighbors did not know anyone named Wade. The blue truck I saw was gone. But inside the basement, behind a false wall, they found old photos, lots of them, printed on faded paper from an old camera, people sitting in their cars in front of the same house, smiling sometimes, talking, some looking scared. One showed a man walking behind the house, just like I had. And one photo was of me standing at the side window, hand raised to the glass. They never found the person who stayed there. They said he used homes in foreclosure as hiding spots, jumped between them, changed numbers, posted ads with burner phones, lured people to isolated areas. Some detectives thought he did it just to frighten. Others thought he had darker plans. No one knew what happened to the other people in the photos. Maybe they ran like I did. Maybe they did not. I deleted Craigslist that night. I felt sick. I bought Milo a certified used car from a dealership in town instead. He was so happy, so proud, never knowing how close I came to something in Willow Bend. But even after that, strange things kept happening. Every time I drove alone through back roads, I checked my mirrors again and again. Sometimes, at random hours like 2:50 a.m. or 7:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with unknown numbers that hung up when I answered. A couple times, I saw cars behind me with their lights off until I reached a busy road. I told myself it was just nerves, stress, old fear. But one night, after a long shift, I was driving past the abandoned farm road on the east side of Yorkton. The sky was cloudy, the wind low, the smell of harvest dust in the air. I saw a blue truck parked far down the dirt road, the same shape, the same rust pattern, no lights, no movement, just sitting there in the dark. I pressed the gas and did not look again. Days turned into weeks, but I never felt free of it. I felt watched, like something had marked me the second I stepped onto that gravel drive. Like the person, the one who used those houses, those ads, those pale figures, was still out there moving from place to place, waiting for the next person to answer the wrong listing at the wrong time. Sometimes, late at night, when the street is empty and everyone in the house is asleep, I hear a faint ringtone from outside. It is the same tinny sound I heard inside that empty house near Yorkton. It always stops before I can reach the window. I try to tell myself it is just someone passing by, but deep down, I know better. Deep down, I know some footsteps never leave once they enter your life. Some doors stay half open forever, creaking in the wind, waiting for you to come just a little closer. Trusting strangers without proper verification can put your life in danger, so always meet sellers in safe, public places. Pay attention to your instincts because fear is often your mind warning you before logic catches up. Protecting yourself and your loved ones requires caution, awareness, and never ignoring signs that something feels wrong. I never believed a small town could hold something. that watched you from the dark until the night swift current showed me what it truly hides under its quiet streets. I still hear the echoes every time the wind touches my window at 2:15 a.m., and the memories rush back like something clawing up out of the past, hungry to be remembered. My name is Mason, born and raised in Saskatchewan, and for most of my adult life I worked as a mobile mechanic fixing busted farm trucks and snow machines from my garage. People around here trusted me because I charged fair prices and minded my own business, and they always said I was too soft-hearted for my own good. They were right. Back then I lived on the east edge of Swift Current with my wife Hannah and our son Jordan, who was 10 at the time, a kid obsessed with hockey like the sport was the only thing keeping his lungs moving. He used to tape broken sticks back together with duct tape and pretend he was firing shots like the players he watched on old highlight DVDs. Money was tight, and the farm work I relied on slowed each winter, so we could not afford the kind of equipment he wished for. Still, he kept hoping, and I kept trying. I grew up poor myself, with a father who walked out when I was 8, and a mother who worked double shifts at the local bakery until her hands went stiff, so I wanted Jordan to have more than I ever did. One late evening that winter, after finishing repairs on a plow truck, I sat alone scrolling through online listings trying to find something I could surprise Jordan with. A hockey net, a real one, not the tiny plastic thing he used in the driveway. Every listing was too expensive. Then I saw it. Regulation size net, gently used, cheap, pickup only, no pictures, only a short description and a number. Something about it felt strange, but also tempting, like the kind of deal you stumble on only once. I hesitated, thinking about scams, but when you picture your kid finally getting something he has dreamed about for years, you push the worry down like a nail you do not want to see sticking out. I called the number. A man answered after a few rings, his voice low and flat, in a way that made my skin cold. He told me he still had the net and could meet me somewhere away from town since he was passing through from the north. He suggested a rest stop off the Trans-Canada near a secluded turnoff west of Swift Current. He said he finished work late, so the meeting would need to be around 7:45 p.m. I should have said no. I should have hung up, but I was tired and hopeful and stupid in the way only a father trying his best can be. When I told Hannah, she told me not to take Jordan. I agreed. Then Jordan begged me, promising he would stay in the truck and not cause trouble. I felt guilty for always saying no, so I told him he could come. That was the mistake that still burns through my nerves like ice water when I remember that night. The drive felt normal at first, the highway empty except for a few semis pushing through the winter cold. Jordan talked nonstop about how he would practice, how he would show his friends, how this would finally make him feel like everyone else. I kept pretending everything was fine, even though my gut kept twisting every time I imagined the stranger's flat voice. The sky was already dark when we pulled into the rest stop 20 minutes west of town. The area was lit by a few old yellow lights that flickered like they were fighting to stay alive. The vending building was empty, no cars in sight, just the hum of the lights and the crunch of snow under my boots. I parked under the brightest light I could find and told Jordan to stay inside and lock the doors if anything felt wrong. He nodded and gave me a small smile, trusting me in a way that still hurts when I think about how close I came to losing him that night. At 7:45 p.m., right on the dot, a black pickup rolled in and stopped about 30 feet in front of us. It looked old but well kept, with tinted windows and no front license plate. The window cracked open, and I saw a man inside wearing a heavy coat and dark glasses, even though it was night, his face expressionless. He asked if I was the one who called. When I said yes, he said someone behind him had the equipment. I looked at the back of his truck. Empty. Not even a scrap of metal, let alone a net. My stomach tightened. I asked why he did not bring everything in one truck. He barely shrugged. Something about that tiny shrug made dread crawl across my spine like ice. Then 2 more trucks pulled in from opposite sides of the lot. Same model, same dark windows. When the doors opened, I saw large men climbing out, their breath steaming in the cold, their faces blank. No hockey gear, no sticks, no net, only hard stares and slow steps. Something inside me snapped awake. Not panic, something deeper, some old instinct my father used to call the voice that saved our ancestors. I turned toward the truck and yelled for Jordan to lock the doors. He did it instantly. The men moved like they had been waiting for that moment. They spread out, closing in with the calmness of predators who have done this before. I tried handing the man the envelope of money I had brought, hoping to end things before they went any closer to the truck. He took it, flipped through it, and his mouth tightened. Then he tipped his head in a way that told the others everything without speaking. 2 men rushed toward the truck, one swinging something heavy that caught the light. A tire iron. I ran, yelling for them to stop, yelling for my son. I could hear my boots sliding on the icy ground, feel the freezing air stabbing into my throat. The man with the tire iron slammed it into the back window of my truck. The glass shattered with a sound that tore through me worse than the cold. Jordan screamed, a sound I had never heard come out of him before, a sound that will haunt me until my last breath. Before they could grab him, a high-pitched wail cut through the night. Blue and red lights flashed across the snow. A highway patrol cruiser screeched into the lot, spotlight blasting across the scene. The men froze. Then they scattered like animals caught stealing food. 2 trucks bolted toward the road, engines roaring. The third crashed into a snowbank while trying to turn too fast. The officer leapt out with his weapon raised, yelling at the man still standing near my truck. More sirens echoed from down the highway. Backup arrived in minutes. Jordan was pulled out by the officer and wrapped in a blanket, shaking so hard the blanket rustled like paper in the wind. When the police finally gathered the suspects, one of the men from the crashed truck broke easily. He told them everything. They had been using fake listings for months, luring people into isolated spots, robbing them, sometimes worse. They targeted single parents, people they assumed would be desperate. He said they had done it up north as well, and even hinted that they had used abandoned vehicles as bait in other towns. The officer listening to him frowned and told me later that they had several reports in the last year of the same abandoned car showing up on the same rural road, even after being towed away multiple times. No driver ever seen. No footprints in snow. Just the same rusted door hanging open like an invitation. I did not want to think about how close I came to being another missing person report. The cops drove us home that night. Jordan clung to my arm the whole way and would not look out the window. I stayed awake long after he fell asleep, listening to the wind and waiting for headlights that never came. A few days later, I heard something else from a friend who worked nights at a motel near the highway. She told me that the week before my incident, the cleaner assigned to the West Wing had heard crying from a room that had no guest registered, a room that maintenance swore stayed locked for months. When she called out asking if someone needed help, the crying stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps right behind the door. She quit that same night. Around the same time, the night clerk swore he kept seeing the same couple checking in during heavy storms, dripping wet, smiling in a way that felt wrong. They never aged. They never changed clothes. They always asked for the same room. And every time he blinked, they seemed a little less solid, like fog pretending to be human. These stories should have been rumors, the kind of thing passed around to spook new hires. But after what happened to me, I did not doubt them. Something about Swift Current has always attracted things that hide in the dark, things that replay themselves like old memories trapped in the land. Some are human, some are not. And some pretend to be one until you get close enough to see the truth. A few weeks later, detectives told me they caught 5 of the 6 men. The last one, the man with the dark glasses, vanished like smoke. They searched towns all along the Trans-Canada and found nothing. No car, no prints, no trace. It was like he never existed. Except I know he did. I can still see the shape of his face behind the glass, still hear the flatness in his voice. Life went back to something close to normal after that. Jordan eventually got a hockey net from a neighbor whose son left for university. He practiced again, slowly, like he was teaching his heart how to trust the world one shot at a time. I kept working on trucks. I kept watching the highway with a new kind of fear. I kept wondering if the missing man had ever truly driven away. Some nights, when the winter wind whistles through the cracks of my old garage roof, I see a shape at the edge of the lot, a dark truck with lights off, parked in the same spot it was that night. I blink, and it is gone. But I know what I saw. Some shadows do not disappear. They return for unfinished business. One night last spring, I was driving back from a late repair job north of town when my headlights caught something on the shoulder. A black truck, no plates, driver's seat empty, snow falling lightly. I felt that old gut instinct rise again like a warning siren inside my bones. I locked the doors and kept going. In the rearview mirror, the truck lights flickered like someone inside had just woken up. Maybe that town worker was right when he said the same abandoned cars kept coming back. Maybe some stories never stay buried. Maybe some things that hunt you do not hunt for money. Maybe they hunt for fear, and once they find you, they remember the taste. I still live in Swift Current. People say it is peaceful. People say nothing happens here. But I know better. I learned the truth under a flickering light with my son screaming behind a cracked window, with strangers closing in like wolves wearing human skin. And every time I hear footsteps outside my shop at night, I wonder if the man with the dark glasses has finally come to finish the story he started. If you ever drive through Swift Current at night and see a black truck parked alone, engine cold, windows too dark to see through, keep moving. Do not stop. Do not slow down. Do not look inside. Because some creatures travel only in the dark, and some memories come back only when someone is foolish enough to open the door. I did not plan to come back to North Battleford. I had passed through that town many years ago, when the winters felt heavier and the sky always looked close enough to crush you, but life dragged me there again. I had been drifting from job to job after losing everything I cared about, so when I found an online post that promised a room and steady work inside a private estate outside the small town, I grabbed the chance without thinking. My name is Julian Hart, and at that time, I was too tired to be careful. When you sleep in your car for weeks and heat a can of beans on a lighter, your mind stops checking for danger. You just want a door that locks and a bed that will not collapse when you roll over. That listing felt like a lifeline when every part of me was sinking. The trip to the estate was silent and eerie. The land around North Battleford always made me feel like it hid things under the frost. The sky was wide, the fields empty, and the gravel road leading toward the property stretched on without a single sign of another person. My old van rattled like it was begging me to turn around, but I kept going because I had nothing else. Far off to my right, I saw grain silos standing like tall shadows, and for a moment I thought I heard a soft knock from inside one, even though they were marked empty with large faded paint. I told myself it must have been the wind or some loose metal hitting the frame, but the sound had rhythm, like someone asking to be let out. I kept my eyes forward and tried to forget it. By the time the estate came into view, the sky had shifted into that strange dark blue that comes before night. The house looked old, large, and shaped like it once held big family gatherings but had forgotten how. It had tall windows and wide stone steps, but no warmth, no signs of people laughing inside, only a cold stillness. A man stood on the top step waiting for me. He wore a black overcoat and held himself straight like someone who had to appear calm even when he was not. He said his name was Mr. Beale and that he managed the property for the owner, a quiet man named Rowan Hale who traveled often. I nodded and tried not to stare at the house too long because the windows looked like they were watching me back. Mr. Raff? Beale led me around to a small guest house behind the main building. It sat near a cluster of trees that leaned together like they had secrets to keep. The air around that little house felt heavy, and the trees blocked the wind so everything stayed strangely still. Inside, the guest house had a bed, a small bathroom, a tiny table, and a wired landline phone on the wall. Mr. Beale told me there was no cell service anywhere on the property, so if the owner needed me, the phone would ring. I nodded even though something in me twisted at the idea of being cut off from everything. I asked him what exactly my job would be since the post only said general help, and he said I would cook simple meals and clean parts of the main house, things he did not have time for. He paused at the door and told me not to get startled if I heard noises at night because the land carried echoes in unusual ways. The words felt rehearsed, like he had said them before to someone else, maybe many times. He looked at me for a long second, as if checking whether I would run, but I just gave a tired smile, and he left. That first night, I lay on the thin mattress staring at the ceiling. I finally had a roof, warmth, and a locked door, but something would not let me settle. I kept hearing soft taps outside the window, like someone gently hitting the glass. I pulled the curtain aside and found nothing, only the tall, dark trees swaying slowly, even though there was no wind. I tried to sleep again, but later, around 2:23 a.m., I heard what sounded like quiet crying. Not loud, not panicked, more like someone trying not to be noticed. It came from somewhere under me. I pressed my ear to the floor, but the sound faded before I could tell what it was. The next morning, I dragged myself to the main house. I looked like I had not slept in days, which was mostly true. Inside the kitchen, I met an older woman named Patricia who said she had helped in that house for decades. She had tired eyes but a warm smile, the kind people give when they understand pain. She mentioned that new workers sometimes struggled with the quiet of the place. I nodded and kept cooking breakfast even though my hands shook slightly. As days passed, I learned that no one ever saw the owner, Rowan Hale. People spoke about him the way kids talk about shadows in the hallway, always there but never seen directly. I also learned from Patricia that the guest house I stayed in used to belong to a woman who worked here last year, someone who left suddenly without taking her things. They claimed she went to stay with family, but something about the way Patricia spoke told me she did not believe the story. Strange things kept happening. Every night the taps returned, soft first, then firmer. Sometimes footsteps moved around outside even though no one lived near that part of the property. One night, around 3:11 a.m., the phone on the wall rang. I jumped so hard I almost fell. When I answered, I only heard static, then a faint voice whispering, "Help," before it cut out. I rushed outside, looking for anyone who might have called, but the yard was empty. The trees seemed closer than before, like they had crept in during the night. One evening, while walking near the grain fields behind the estate, I passed those old silos again. They were still marked empty. The marks looked old and scratched, as if someone tried to scrape them off. I heard the knocking again from inside, one soft but steady, like a single hand tapping metal. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the air, and whispered to myself that it must be an animal trapped inside. But deep down I knew the tapping had too much patience, too much rhythm, the way a person might knock if they had been waiting for hours. I backed away fast, promising myself I would not go near those silos again, not even during daylight. Things worsened when I started cleaning the upstairs hallway of the main house. The walls were lined with old portraits of people who looked like they wanted to tell me something, but were frozen mid-sentence. The floorboards creaked like they were tired of holding secrets. I heard a voice from behind a closed door at the far end of the hall, a soft whispering that sounded like someone trying to remember their own name. When I turned the knob, the voice stopped. The room inside was empty except for a broken chair and torn wallpaper. I did not clean upstairs again unless Patricia came with me. Late one night, when I was trying to sleep, I heard loud thumps under my floor. Not taps this time, but heavy bangs, like someone hitting from below. I froze. The crying returned, louder, and this time it sounded afraid. I got out of bed and pushed the small table aside. The boards under the rug seemed uneven, like they had been disturbed many times. My heart pounded against my ribs, and for a moment I thought I should run to the main house, but the crying would not stop. I felt sick listening to it. I got a small screwdriver from the drawer and started prying up one of the boards. A smell rose up, cold and foul, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave a room. Under the floor was old fabric, dirty and stiff. When I pulled it aside, my breath caught. A face stared up at me, dry and pale, frozen in terror. The body was curled like it had tried to make itself small. I stumbled back and crashed against the wall. I think I screamed, but the only sound I remember is the wind suddenly picking up outside as if the land woke up. I ran to the main house and banged on the door until Mr. Beale came out. I shouted at him, telling him what I found, my words shaking so hard they barely made sense. His face drained of color. He called the police with hands that trembled like he already knew this day would come. Officers from the small town arrived fast, their lights cutting across the dark fields. As they searched the guest house, I overheard one of their radios pick up a strange signal, a man's voice asking for help on a channel they said had not been used in years. They looked at each other like they wanted to pretend they had not heard it. They did not answer the call. They pulled the remains from under the floor. It belonged to the woman who had worked here before me, the one Patricia said had left suddenly. But she never left. Her boyfriend, a man with a record of violence, had shown up one night looking for her. He stayed long enough to kill her and hide her under the floor using a fake figure in her clothes to fool the cameras at the gate. The police found him hiding in another province. He confessed without much push, like someone who had been waiting to tell the story. When they sealed the guest house, I felt cold all through my body. Not just from fear, but because I realized the noises I heard were not echoes. They were her. She had been calling out night after night, long after her voice had faded from the world. I quit that same day. I packed my few belongings, started my van, and drove out the long dirt road as fast as the engine allowed. But when I passed the grain silos on my way out, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The empty markings had been crossed out with fresh scratches, deep ones like nails dragged hard against metal. And for just a second, only a breath, I heard the soft tapping again, slow and steady, like someone inside patiently waiting. I did not stop. I did not look back. But sometimes, late at night, when the world turns quiet and the wind slows down, I hear tapping again in my dreams, and it always sounds like it is coming from under me. In the end, this story reminds us that staying alert can protect us from hidden dangers, even when we feel desperate or tired. Strange signs, unusual behavior, and quiet warnings should never be ignored, because small clues often point to bigger truths. Trust must be given carefully, especially in isolated places or with people we barely know. And above all, speaking up and paying attention can save not only our life, but the life of someone who can no longer call for help. I always thought fear was something that lived far away from people like me, people who worked hard, kept quiet, and minded their own business, but that belief broke the night. I learned how close fear can stand without making a sound. Back then, I lived in a small apartment near the edge of Estevan, in a quiet spot behind the old train yard where the wind always seemed to whisper strange things through the steel tracks. I was an oil field operator at a site outside town, 12-hour night shifts every day except weekends, and the work was tiring but steady. When you spend most of your life awake while others sleep, the world starts to feel tilted, like you're moving through a place just slightly out of step with everyone else. My phone was my alarm, my reminder, my only connection to normal life. It told me when to wake up, when to head to work, when to pay rent, and when the long nights stretched too far. I would sleep through the daylight like a stone at the bottom of a river, falling into dreams so heavy I could barely crawl out of them. That strange life made me slow to answer calls, slow to understand danger, and even slower to recognize the wrong footsteps inside my own home. I had only one real friend back then, a girl named Ria, someone who checked on me more than I deserved, someone who had a spare key to my place only because she worried I might forget to breathe during those long nights. I never asked for help, but she gave it anyway, and sometimes the only thing that kept me from drifting too far was knowing she might knock just to see if I was still alive. One winter afternoon, after a long shift in the bitter cold, I collapsed into bed around 7:45 a.m., which I always thought of as night even though the sun was rising. The world outside was quiet, snow piled against the curbs, and the apartment heater rattled like it was shivering too. I fell asleep so deeply that nothing mattered. Not the cold, not the noise, not even the strange feeling that someone had moved things inside my locker at work again. Every shift, I found things arranged differently inside it. My gloves folded the wrong way, my badge set upside down, my lunch bag unzipped. The guys joked about ghosts in the break room, but the way the air felt around that locker made my hair rise. Still, I was too tired to worry about that or anything else. When I woke up, it was almost 2:45 p.m., and my phone screen was filled with missed calls, more than a dozen, all from my landlord, all spaced close together. My stomach tightened as I scrolled through texts that filled the screen with blunt panic. Call me. Emergency. Water leak downstairs. Had to shut your water off. Call now. I pushed myself up, dizzy, half awake, and the cold floor made my toes curl. I called him back, and he sounded annoyed, like I had ruined his day by needing sleep. He told me the tenant under me had water pouring through her ceiling, and the leak seemed to be coming from my bathroom. Since I didn't answer all day, they shut my water off hours ago. He said it wasn't his problem, it was mine. Get someone to fix it, send in the bill, deal with it fast. I felt a deep ache behind my eyes. No water meant no shower, no coffee, no flushing, nothing. I asked if he could call someone. He said it wasn't his job. Then he hung up. Half awake and irritated, I called every plumber in Estevan I could find, checked online listings, searched through old Facebook pages, left voicemails for companies that probably went out of business years ago. The few who answered wanted huge fees or said they were booked until next week. Snowstorms always cause pipes to burst, they said, and I was too late. My frustration burned into something sharp, and I messaged Rhea. She said I could stay at her place if things didn't work out, and then she told me to try online ads because some guys around town took quick jobs for cash. I didn't like the idea. Those sites felt like a wild maze full of strangers. But I was desperate and tired. After scrolling for 10 minutes, I found an ad that caught my eye. Handyman, 28 years old, fast work. Cheap, can handle plumbing, electrical, repairs. Call or text. It was simple, direct, maybe too simple, but I told myself people in small towns posted like that because they didn't care about fancy words. I messaged the number and got a call within minutes. The man's voice was calm, friendly, maybe too smooth for a tradesman, but I didn't want to judge. He said his name was Joel, and he could be there in an hour. He said it sounded like an easy fix, probably nothing serious. I believed him because I needed to. True to his promise, about an hour later he texted outside. I walked to the door, rubbing sleep from my eyes. I realized then I never told him my apartment number. That thought should have bothered me more, but exhaustion made me slow. I buzzed him in, and moments later his knock came down the hall. When I opened the door, he looked normal, maybe too normal, wearing faded jeans and a gray jacket, carrying a tool bag. His hair was cut short, his face blank but polite. He stepped inside without hesitation when I pointed toward the bathroom, walking like someone who had already memorized the place. While he went to inspect the leak, I shuffled to the kitchen. My throat felt dry, so I poured orange juice into a chipped cup. The space felt strange that day, colder than usual, like someone had left a window open even though everything was shut tight. I tried to shake it off. After a minute, he called out in a strange tone. He said something, looked off, and asked me to come look. I walked toward the bathroom, dragging my feet across the floor. The hallway felt too long, the light too dim, and something heavy pressed against my chest as I stepped closer. That moment, that step toward the doorway, is the last clear thing in my memory before the world split in two. Everything after that was bright, too bright, a hot white blur behind my eyes. Voices spoke near me, but they sounded far away, muffled, like someone underwater calling my name. I felt hands on me, warm, steady hands telling me not to move. Someone held a light to my eyes, and the glow burned through my skull. I blinked and saw a paramedic leaning over me, her face calm, her voice firm. She said I had a head injury and needed to stay still. I tried to sit up, but she held my shoulders down. My heartbeat thumped like a hammer inside my chest. Then I heard a small sob, a voice breaking, and I turned my head enough to see Rhea standing at the edge of the room, her face pale, her eyes full of fear. She kept asking if I was okay, her voice trembling. She said she came to check on me when I didn't answer her messages, used her spare key, and found me on the floor, bleeding, cold, alone. They took me to the hospital and tested everything, shining lights in my eyes, checking the wound on my head, trying to keep me awake. The hours passed slowly, sounds echoing like they were coming from inside a long metal pipe. When a detective finally came in, I already knew something terrible had happened, but I wasn't ready to hear it. He told me my apartment had been turned inside out, my TV gone, my laptop gone, my wallet, cash, every bit of jewelry, anything worth money had vanished. My bedroom had been tossed like someone was angry, digging, searching, hunting. He said the bathroom was untouched, not a mark on the tiles, not a tool out of place. just the rest of my home stripped apart. He said people in towns around Saskatchewan had reported similar incidents. Someone pretending to be a handyman, knocking people out, stealing everything, disappearing without leaving a trace. No fingerprints, no name, no real phone number, nothing. They weren't even sure if it was the same person every time. Just the same cold pattern every single time. When he told me that, my skin crawled. It felt like something inside me had cracked open. After I was discharged, the world didn't feel the same. I couldn't breathe right inside my own apartment. The walls felt closer, the air thicker, the silence heavier. I didn't leave the place for days, sometimes weeks. I kept every light on because the dark felt alive. I ignored calls, ignored people, ignored the food on my counter until it spoiled. I locked my door twice, then pushed a chair against it. I kept a kitchen knife by my bed. I bought a cheap camera and pointed it at the door, watching the screen like a prisoner waiting for footsteps. When I went back to the oil field weeks later, my locker looked disturbed again. My things were arranged wrong, my clothes folded in a way I didn't do, a faint smell of cold metal rising from inside it. The others teased me, but their jokes felt thin, like they were scared too. At night, I kept imagining someone walking between the pump jacks, watching, waiting, slipping through the shadows. On the drive home, strange things began to happen. Every winter night, I saw a small figure standing near the same stretch of road outside Estevan, a child, barely 5 or 6 years old, wearing a pale coat, standing silent in the snow. Every time I drove past, the child was there, never closer, never moving, just staring with empty stillness. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, but deep down I knew better. That stretch of road had swallowed accidents before. People said old things walked through that area, waiting for rides they never got. I stopped staying at motels during storms because one night, at a place near the main highway, I woke to soft drilling sounds coming from beneath the floor, steady, slow, like someone digging their way upward. I asked the front desk about it in the morning, but the clerk just stared blankly and said the motel had no basement at all. The fear changed me in ways I didn't understand. I jumped at every noise. My heart raced when footsteps passed my door. I hid behind curtains when someone knocked unexpectedly. I started flinching whenever a stranger looked at me too long, wondering if it was the same man or one like him waiting to step inside again. Rhea tried to help for months. She cooked for me, talked to me, tried to bring warmth back into my walls, but she eventually moved away for a job in another province. After that, I was alone with shadows that seemed too patient. My scar healed, but it never disappeared. It sat under my beard like a quiet reminder of the moment my life shifted sideways. Some days, I touched it without thinking, feeling the rough shape of what fear had carved into me. Last week, after a long night shift, I finally put the knife back in the drawer. Not because I felt safe, but because I wanted to try. I told myself that wanting was enough, even if believing wasn't. Sometimes though, late at night when the wind pushes against the apartment windows, I hear something move across the hallway floor outside my door. Soft, slow, familiar. And sometimes, when I check the camera, I swear I see a shape standing just out of view, waiting like it knows I'm awake. I don't know if the man ever left Estevan. I don't know if he ever will. But I do know one thing. Fear can learn the shape of your home, and once it does, it never really forgets. Even in small towns, checking a worker's identity and credentials can prevent dangerous situations. Always share your location or plans with a trusted person when letting someone new into your home. Trusting your instincts is an important safety skill because fear often warns us before danger arrives. I never understood how a peaceful place could turn into something that feels alive in the dark, something that watches, something that waits. I learned that lesson only after moving to Weyburn, a quiet town tucked among endless fields and pale blue skies, a place so small and calm that people left their doors unlocked and waved at strangers like old friends. My name is Jace, and back then I worked as a night janitor at a local school, an easy job that let me pay the bills while planning a future with my partner Mara. We had just moved into a house that looked innocent, a little 2-bedroom place at the edge of Weyburn, where the backyard faded into a stretch of trees that locals called the shelter belt. Everyone said it was safe. Everyone said the town was gentle. Everyone said nothing strange ever happened there. They were wrong. Even before the nightmare began, something felt off in that house. Maybe it was the way the wind slid through the yard like it carried whispers. Maybe it was the way shadows gathered too easily under the trees. Maybe it was the way the nights felt heavy, as if the darkness pressed against the windows instead of just settling around them. I tried ignoring it, told myself it was just new house nerves. Mara laughed it off, though I always caught her glancing toward the backyard as if she felt something staring back. We had only lived there for 2 weeks when everything changed. It was a warm evening, the kind where the air feels sticky and tired after a long day. I was sitting at the dining table looking through cheap furniture online, thinking about how to decorate the place. Mara was in the kitchen making pasta, humming softly while stirring the pot, her hair pulled into a messy bun, her cheeks warm from the steam. The house felt too hot, so I decided to open the back door to let some fresh air in. But the moment I reached the glass door, I froze. A man was sitting in one of our backyard chairs, hunched forward, unmoving. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I was seeing things. The backyard was dark except for the faint glow spilling from the kitchen lights behind me, but I could see him clearly enough to know he wasn't supposed to be there. He was facing slightly away, shoulders slumped, head lowered like he had been waiting a long time. The sight stabbed panic into my chest so sharply that I forgot how to breathe. Something deep inside me reacted before my mind did. Something primal, something that recognized danger. I slowly turned to Mara, who was still humming while stirring the sauce, unaware of the intruder sitting only yards from her. I whispered her name, trying to keep my voice steady. When I motioned for her to come over, she walked carefully to my side, confused until she saw him. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hand as her face drained of color. The fear in her eyes made my stomach twist. She asked in a tiny, shaking voice who the man was. I didn't know. I didn't know what he wanted. I didn't know how long he had been sitting there. I only knew one thing, that he shouldn't be there and that every part of him radiated wrongness. Mara asked if we should knock on the glass or shout. I didn't want to draw his attention, but I didn't want him sitting there either. My hand hovered near the glass, my heartbeat thundering through my ears, my breath shallow and shaky. Finally, I tapped on the door and tried speaking loudly and firmly, though my voice trembled. I told him to leave, that he was on private property. He lifted his head slowly, too slowly, like something waking from a long, rotting sleep. When he turned toward us, I felt a drop in my stomach like falling from a great height. His face was weathered and cracked, leathery from years of harsh living, with a long, tangled beard and muddy hair. His eyes were the worst part, watery and bloodshot and stretched too wide, like he didn't blink enough, and there was a twisted, crooked smile forming across his mouth that didn't look real. His expression felt wrong, like a person imitating something human, like he was enjoying the fear dripping from our bodies. He stood up, each movement deliberate, stepping closer to the glass door. His eyes locked onto mine, never blinking, never shifting, as if he wanted me to know that he saw me, fully saw me. I grabbed the doorknob tight to make sure it was locked. When he reached the glass, he leaned so close I could see scars like claw marks running across his cheeks. His breath fogged the window as he stared at me, then slowly turned his attention toward Mara. He let his tongue drag across his lips in a slow, disgusting gesture that made my stomach turn. Rage and fear surged through me in equal measure. I shouted that we would call the police. He didn't move. Instead, he muttered something, barely audible at first, but the words grew clearer, darker, filthier, until I felt sick hearing them. He described things he wanted to do to Mara, horrible things. I pulled down the blinds to block his face, but his voice seeped through the thin barrier like poison. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called emergency services, begging them to send someone quickly. I pressed the phone to the glass so the operator could hear the man's ranting. He seemed to enjoy knowing someone was listening. Then, without warning, his voice stopped. I peeked through the blinds, and he was gone, vanished into the trees like he was swallowed by the darkness itself. When the police arrived, they checked the yard but found nothing. They said they'd patrol the area, but without evidence or video they couldn't do much. Mara and I tried to reassure ourselves that maybe he had been drunk, lost, and would never return. We sat in the living room, lights on, trying not to jump at every creak of the settling house. But then we heard something, a faint whisper of movement outside, like leaves gliding against each other or footsteps brushing along the grass. My heart tightened. Mara's eyes widened with terror as she asked if I thought he was back. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I crept toward the window, pulled the blinds just enough to see outside, and felt cold dread crash through me. He was standing in the middle of the yard again. No chair this time, no sitting, no smile. Just standing, cigarette dangling from his lips, staring at the house with dead, hollow eyes. He murmured something to himself, but not to us. It sounded like a one-sided conversation, a twisted argument with someone only he could see. When I accidentally let my breath hitch, his head snapped toward me. Our eyes locked through the glass. He lunged. His palm slammed against the window, the entire pane rattling violently. I stumbled backward. He screamed nonsense, soaked in rage and filth, pounding the window hard enough that I worried it might crack or shatter. Mara rushed upstairs, her footsteps rapid and uneven. I yelled for her to move away from the window. I dialed emergency services again, my voice cracking as I explained that he was trying to break in. By the time the police arrived, he was gone again, swallowed by the trees. The next morning, we went door to door meeting neighbors, hoping someone knew who he was. Most hadn't seen anyone. But an older couple down the street recognized the description immediately. The old man said his name was Rourke, a violent man with a long history of assaults and threats, someone who'd been in and out of trouble for years. He lived just a few blocks away. The old man warned us not to cross him, not to anger him, that he got obsessed easily. Hearing that made something deep inside me twist in fear. It meant he could return whenever he wanted. We reported everything again, but without proof or injury, the police couldn't do anything. And that was the moment I realized we were on our own. Nights became a torture chamber of fear and waiting. I slept lightly, waking at every sound outside. I often checked the backyard window expecting to see him watching again. Some nights the trees swayed strangely, as if someone walked between them, but I told myself it was just the wind. One night, around 2:05 a.m., I heard something slam softly against the siding of the house. Not hard, just enough to make me sit up in bed. Mara whispered, asking what it was, her voice frightened. I didn't know, but I climbed out of bed and crept to the hallway. The air felt still, too still, like the whole house was holding its breath. I went downstairs, every step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the kitchen, I heard something that made my skin crawl, a soft dragging sound across the glass door, like fingers trailing along it. When I got close enough to see, there were smear marks, cloudy streaks on the glass from outside. But no figure, no shadow. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. 2 days later, something even stranger happened. I went to the small hospital in town to visit a friend who had been admitted for dehydration. When I finished and got into the elevator to leave, the doors closed and the lift started moving. But instead of stopping at the first floor, it jolted and descended further. Then the doors opened to a floor that didn't exist on the directory. The walls were unpainted, unfinished concrete. The lights flickered as if struggling to stay alive. A long hallway stretched into darkness. There were no signs, no people, no sounds. I stood there frozen, afraid to step out, afraid to stay inside. When I pressed the door close button repeatedly, the elevator didn't move for a moment. For those few seconds, I felt something watching me from that hall, something waiting. Finally, the doors slid shut and carried me back up. I rushed out of the hospital, trying to shake the sense of dread that crawled up my spine. But things kept getting worse. One morning, I helped a local farmer repair some fence panels along the shelter belt behind our house. He mentioned that his gates had been mysteriously opened and then relocked during the night more than once, with no tracks left behind. He said it wasn't wind, and it wasn't animals. He looked at the tree line like he expected something to look back. He didn't want to talk about it more than that. I couldn't blame him. A week later, while working alone at the school late at night, I was cleaning the broadcasting room where a small radio booth was set up for the school's announcements. Out of curiosity, I turned on the radio system and let it play a quiet, static hum. Then the phone inside the booth rang, sharp and loud. I hesitated before answering. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman I recognized immediately. She had died 2 years earlier, a beloved local singer. I had attended her memorial, yet the voice asked for a song she used to perform, her favorite one. My mouth went dry. When I didn't respond, she repeated the request, then the line went dead. The radio static suddenly shifted, and her song began playing softly through the speakers. I left the school as fast as I could, my heart sprinting. The more all these things happened, the more I felt as if something had cracked open around us after Rourke first appeared. It felt like he dragged something larger, darker with him, something that fed off fear. The edges of reality in Weyburn felt thinner than they used to, like the world could split open at any moment. Every night I was sure he would return. And he did. It was just after 7:45 p.m. on a windy night when I saw him again. Mara and I were locking windows, double-checking doors, getting ready to call the police station directly to ask for extra patrol. But before we could reach the phone, a loud thud echoed through the house. Not on the door this time, but on the side of the house, as if someone had run full force into the wall. We went still, barely breathing. Then another thud. Then dragging. I moved to the window, stomach twisting as I pulled the blinds up an inch. Rourke stood there, closer than he had ever been, staring directly at the window. His eyes were empty but filled with fury, with hunger, with a sick joy. He didn't shout this time. He didn't mutter. He simply smiled, showing yellow-stained teeth. Then he stepped back and started running toward the window. The glass shuddered violently as he hit it with his shoulder, harder than ever before. Mara screamed from behind me. I dragged her upstairs as we heard him pounding again and again, shaking the entire frame. I called emergency services again, terrified they wouldn't arrive in time. I could hear him below us, screaming nonsense, raging, promising things I didn't want to imagine. And then, just like the previous times, his voice cut off. Silence followed. When the police arrived, he was gone again. The officers searched deeper than before, even checking the edge of the old drainage path behind the trees, but they found nothing. They told us they'd keep an eye on the area, but I already knew that no one could protect us from something like him, something that could appear and vanish like smoke. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage he used to perform his madness on. Nights became long, painful hours of waiting for footsteps, whispers, or the sound of skin dragging across glass. Mara stopped cooking, stopped humming, stopped sleeping through the night. She kept asking why he chose us. I never had an answer. I still don't. And that's the part that eats me alive. Because even though he hasn't come back for a while, I can feel it. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck whenever I pass a window, the way shadows seem thicker behind the trees, the way every rustle feels like a warning. Sometimes, late at night, I stand at the glass door and trace the faint smudges left behind, almost gone but not fully. I imagine him standing there again, smiling at me like he knows something I don't. I imagine him waiting for the right moment. I imagine him watching from the trees. And every night I wonder if the next sound outside will be the beginning of something worse. Learning becomes stronger when you practice a little every day instead of all at once. Asking questions is one of the fastest ways to understand difficult ideas. Mistakes are not failures. They are steps that guide you toward better understanding. I never meant to speak about what happened in Lloydminster, but I have reached a point where silence feels heavier than the truth. I tell this now because it is the only way I can sleep again, even for a moment. This story is not a tale I invented. It is a memory pressed into my mind like a scar that refuses to fade. My name is Thomas. I am 79 years old, born far away in a farming village in Eastern Europe, and I lived through days that many people read about only in dusty books. My grandfather, who raised me after the war, carried the kind of nightmares that lived inside his bones. He had been a soldier in a brutal conflict long before I was born, and he survived things that stole pieces of his soul. He never spoke much, but when he did, his voice would shake like a leaf in a storm. He told me one story when I was 16 years old, and I never forgot it. His words settled inside me and shaped the way I saw the world forever. I came to Canada in my early 20s, thinking that new soil would wipe away old shadows. I worked as a welder, saved every penny, and moved to a quiet place where the land stretched far and empty. Lloydminster felt safe then, a small city straddling the provincial border, its streets calm and its winters sharp enough to make your lungs ache. People here minded their own business, and that suited me fine. I thought the world had finally given me peace. But darkness has a way of finding those who think they have outrun it. Everything began on a night when the wind seemed to whisper warnings across the empty fields. I had taken a part-time job then as a night patrol guard, mostly to keep myself busy. It wasn't difficult work, just watching the quiet border stretch from one side of town to the other. Most nights were simple, the kind of silence that lulled you into comfort. But on that first strange night at exactly 3:15 a.m., I saw someone crossing the provincial line on foot. He moved slowly, almost drifting along the road, his long figure bent as though the cold were pushing down on his shoulders. At first I thought he was just a drunk wandering home, but something about the way he walked made the hair on the back of my neck rise. He didn't sway like a drunk, and he didn't stagger like someone freezing. He walked with an uneven, unnatural rhythm, like his body was being pulled by invisible strings. I spoke into my radio, but the static swallowed my voice. When I looked back toward him, he was gone. One moment he was there, and the next, the road was empty. I stayed awake the rest of the night, feeling watched even though I stood alone in the freezing dark. The next night, I saw him again at the same exact time, moving in the same strange way, following the same path across the border. And the night after that. Always at after 3 a.m., always walking, always disappearing when I blinked. I told my supervisor, but he laughed and said I was seeing things. But I knew something wasn't right. Around that same time, I rented a small house on the edge of town, an old place with peeling paint and long hallways that held cold even in summer. The landlord mentioned the attic had been sealed off for years and should stay that way. I didn't care much. I only needed a bed and a roof. But 3 days after seeing the border walker, I began hearing voices from the attic at night. They were low at first, like two people whispering urgently. Then the sounds grew louder. I heard arguing, angry and desperate, as though two unseen people were fighting for their lives behind the boards that locked the attic shut. Every night, the sounds began around 7:45 p.m. and continued until midnight. I stood under the attic door, my knees shaking, listening to the muffled shouting. I wanted to leave, but I didn't have the money to rent another place. I tried to tell myself it was old pipes or wind slipping through cracks, but deep down I knew better. At work, things were becoming stranger too. A mechanic friend of mine named Lewis worked at a shop that serviced vehicles for half the town. One morning, he called me in a shaky voice and asked me to come quickly. When I arrived, he pointed me toward a pickup truck scheduled only for routine service. Inside, the seats were soaked with dark, almost black blood. The walls of the truck cab were smeared with streaks of brownish red that looked like fingers had dragged through it. But the owner swore the truck had been cleaned that morning. Lewis had seen the same thing inside 2 other cars earlier that week. He whispered that something dark was moving through Lloydminster. I believed him. The cold grew sharper as days passed, stabbing at my lungs each time I stepped outside. One night, after another shift where I watched the border walker vanish again at 3:30 a.m., I returned home exhausted. I wanted only to sleep, but the arguing voices erupted from the attic before I even removed my boots. They sounded clearer now, louder, as if the boards sealing that attic were thinner than before. I pressed my ear to the ceiling and heard one voice screaming a single word over and over, a word I didn't understand but felt in my bones. It sounded like a warning, something ancient and terrified. Then everything went silent, as if someone had pressed a hand over a mouth. That silence was worse than the voices. I backed away slowly, knowing I couldn't stay in that house any longer. But as I reached for the door, footsteps sounded above me. Slow, dragging footsteps. Something was moving in the sealed attic. I stood frozen. The steps moved from one side to the other, circling, pacing. Then they stopped directly above me. The ceiling creaked as if something leaned down close, listening to me breathe. I ran out of the house, my heart beating so hard I could barely see. I didn't return until morning, when the sunlight made the cold air feel safe again. That same day, I sought out my grandfather's old journal, the one he kept locked in a wooden box. I remembered the story he once told me about a night in a frozen forest after a forgotten battle. He and his closest friend had stepped outside to smoke in the bitter cold. They heard a scream, a man's cry torn apart by terror. They gathered their weapons, ran into the woods, and found the bodies of enemy soldiers torn apart. Blood splashed across the snow in strange patterns. One was still alive, shaking violently, whispering a word my grandfather never understood. Then a tall figure appeared between the trees, thin and twisted, with hollow eyes and limbs too long for its body. It moved strangely, almost bending backward as it slipped into the shadows. My grandfather swore it didn't walk. He said it glided. That was the night that haunted him until his final breath. As I read his words again in the safety of daylight, my hands trembled. I realized the same thing he saw might have found me in Lloydminster, something old. Something hungry. I kept working because I needed the money, but each shift felt heavier than the last. On the fourth night, when I stood at the border, I checked my watch every few seconds. At 3 a.m., the tall figure appeared again. This time, it stopped. It stood on the borderline, its long arms hanging like dead branches, its head tilted as if listening. I felt its gaze on me even though it had no eyes I could see. My breath froze in front of me, hanging in the air like it refused to fall. Then it raised one hand, slowly, like it was pointing at me. My feet refused to move. I could not breathe. I could not blink. When I finally gasped and looked away only for a moment, the figure disappeared, but the cold stayed behind, sinking into my bones. The next day, news spread around town that a young couple living near the old farms east of Lloydminster had vanished. Their car was found parked outside their house, the key still inside, the seats covered in the same dark blood Lewis had shown me in the mechanic shop. People whispered that wolves might be responsible, but no wolf strips fleshed the way my grandfather described. I tried to contact the landlord to ask about the attic, but he refused to speak to me. When I went to his office, the secretary said he had left town unexpectedly. She looked as frightened as I felt. That evening, as I sat alone in my kitchen trying to steady my nerves, the attic voices returned. They sounded furious, desperate, like they were fighting to break free. I covered my ears, but the sounds grew louder, echoing through the walls. My lights flickered. The floor vibrated beneath my feet. Then the house fell silent. No wind, no creaking, nothing. A soft tapping started above me, a slow, careful tap, like long fingers testing the boards. I grabbed my coat and fled the house again. I spent the night sitting inside my car outside a well-lit gas station. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the border walker, the attic shadows, the blood in those cars. It felt like everything was converging, all pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to understand. The next night, I decided to return to the house only to gather my belongings. I arrived at 7:45 p.m., when the voices usually started. The sky was darkening into deep winter blue, and the streetlights glowed like watchful eyes. As soon as I stepped inside, a wave of cold wrapped around me, colder than the winter outside. My breath formed thick clouds in front of me. I moved quickly, stuffing clothes and documents into a bag. But before I could finish, something thudded above me, one loud thud. Then another. Something heavy was walking in the attic again, but this time the steps were faster, angrier. The boards above my head strained loudly. Dust sifted down like falling ash. I backed away, but a long crack split across the attic door. A second crack, then a third. Something was forcing its way out. I ran outside and didn't stop until I reached my car. I drove until the city lights faded in my mirror. I thought leaving Lloydminster would solve everything, but I was wrong. Even outside the city, along the dark highway, I saw a figure walking on the side of the road. Tall, thin. moving with that same unnatural rhythm. My hands shook on the steering wheel. When I blinked, the figure disappeared. When I looked in the rearview mirror, it stood in the middle of the road behind me. I pressed the gas until the engine roared. I didn't return to Lloydminster for a long time. I moved north, rented a room far from the border, far from the attic, far from the road where the tall figure walked. But even now, sometimes at 2 a.m., I wake up gasping, feeling cold air brush against my face, as if someone stands beside my bed watching me in the dark. I don't know what followed me. I don't know if it is the same creature my grandfather saw in that frozen forest long before I was born. I only know it is not human, and once it chooses you, it does not let you go. Some nights, I hear footsteps on the roof above my room. Slow, careful, testing the boards. And sometimes, when the wind falls silent, I hear a voice whisper my name from somewhere just out of sight. I don't look anymore. Looking only invites it closer. I am telling you this so you will understand what waits in the quiet corners of the world, even in small towns like Lloydminster, where nothing dangerous is supposed to happen. I want you to know that some shadows do not belong to any living thing, and some footsteps do not belong to any human soul. And if you ever find yourself awake at 2:13 a.m., staring into the dark, listening to something move outside your window, do not follow the sound. Do not open the door. Do not call out, because it might answer you.